Joe, this shouldn't need to be explained, but it does apparently. Today we'll talk about why Christians should not and cannot support Joe Biden. Also, 5 headlines, including Trump receiving an endorsement from another famous rapper, and in our daily cancellation, in light of recent events involving Jeffrey Toobin, I will be canceling Zoom and all other forms of video calling. All of that coming up. But we begin here. You know, every few days it seems there's another news article, blog post, editorial making the rounds on Facebook and stuff with a title like, you know, why this evangelical minister is voting for Joe Biden, or I'm an actual pro-life Christian, so I'm voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or faith leaders back Biden in sign that evangelical support for Trump is waning. The polls still say that Trump is leading as expected with Protestants, though Biden also, as expected, I'm afraid, has majority support among Catholics. Overall, people who qualify, at least according to pollsters, as highly religious still tend not to vote for Democrats. But the trends are troubling. Support for Joe Biden or any other Democrat candidate among religious people ought to be steady at around 0%. But it's quite higher than 0 and rising. And that's a problem. Now, I'm not here to claim that a Christian has any obligation to vote for Republicans. That's not the point. The Republican Party is not the official Christian party, and Christians have no obligation to it. I'm also not going to argue that Donald Trump is a man of deep faith or high moral character, because I don't believe he is either of those things. You know, if you happen to listen to Ben Shapiro's show yesterday, I agree with his take on Trump and the reasons to vote for him. That's not going to be my focus, though. Whatever you decide to do on Election Day, what I can say is that if you're a Christian or an adherent to any other major religion for that matter, you simply cannot vote for Joe Biden. You can, obviously, in the sense that you have the right to and the physical ability to, but you can't do it justifiably or in a way that is consistent with your professed worldview. And the reason for that is very simple. Let's leave aside any question of personal character. You know, I don't think that Biden is unassailably decent and honest the way he's been branded, but never mind that. It comes down to what sorts of things Biden will do, the policies he supports, the bills he will happily sign. I would say that it's not possible to be a decent man who enacts evil policies, but even if it is, what good is that alleged decency? If a man smiles while he punches you in the face, your nose will be no less broken for it. And in the case of Biden, the consequences are far worse than a broken nose. Like this: 60 million children have already been slaughtered by abortion since Roe v. Wade. The grotesque and ludicrous Supreme Court decision that Biden supports and has pledged to defend with all his might. As a Christian, or simply as a person with a functioning moral compass, there is no way to minimize 60 million murdered babies. We are compelled to see it just as it is. Unthinkable wickedness, a historic atrocity, an injustice of unfathomable proportions. Joe Biden intends to continue this slaughter, indeed to fund it. After opposing tax funding for abortion for many years, Biden recently reversed himself and decided that American citizens should be forced at proverbial, or maybe not so proverbial, gunpoint to contribute financially to the extermination of human beings. Biden does not support any restrictions on abortion. Biden believes that mothers have a God-given sacred right to execute their offspring, and he plans to do everything in his power to protect that right. His running mate, we should note, is even more radically infanticidal than he is. Kamala Harris has been given a 100% perfect score from the pro-abortion group NARAL for a reason, a good reason. And this is all that should need to be said about good old decent Joe. It's all that a Christian needs to hear. But there's more. Even so, Biden is an enemy of religious liberty, vowing, among other things, to reinstate Obama's policy of forcing nuns to allow, quote, access to contraception. Biden's also said that passing the Orwellian and inaccurately named Equality Act would be one of the first priorities of his presidency. This law would make both sexual orientation and gender identity into protected categories under the Civil Rights Act, meaning that a man who identifies as a woman would now be the victim of a civil rights abuse should this self-identification not be respected by, say, a women's shelter that he is demanding access to. This is not only an assault on religious liberty, as it forbids the people who run these organizations from operating according to their religious and moral beliefs, but also an assault on science and basic common sense and decency. Speaking of which, Joe Biden very recently endorsed the notion that an 8-year-old boy ought to be able to transition into a girl. Now, whether he really believes this madness or not is another question. The fact remains that he's bought into it, acquiesced to it. The most dangerous and fantastical claims made by the most radical elements of his base, he has acquiesced to and pledged to govern accordingly. And on the same topic of dangerous and radical elements, Biden is a staunch proponent and supporter of the racist, Marxist organization Black Lives Matter, a group that has, in its spare time between fomenting race riots and calling for the defunding of police departments in the most crime-plagued communities in the nation, also publicly pledged to disrupt the nuclear family. This is what Joe Biden supports. These are the things he plans to actually do. Granted, he probably won't send very many mean tweets, and his speeches will be less ad-libbed and probably include fewer profanities, though there's no guarantee on that second point. But that's window dressing anyway. What should matter most to us as Christians is that even if he's less bombastic about it, he will help to shape America into a country that is even more hostile to faith, even more dangerous to children, even more fundamentally opposed to us and what we believe. He doesn't deserve our support, shouldn't receive it. So do what you like with your vote, but don't use it to undermine yourself and the values that you supposedly hold dear. It's really as simple as that. Let's get to our 5 headlines.